It's not every day that a Formula One driver has to sit out a race for life-saving surgery, but that's exactly the situation Williams driver Alex Albon found himself in ahead of the 2022 Italian Grand Prix. After he had surgery for appendicitis over the Monza weekend, another driver had to step into his shoes, and he shocked everyone. In today's video, we're talking about Nyck de Vries' insane F1 debut, his future on the grid, and what the other drivers have to say about him. First up, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen on Nyck de Vries. No one can deny Nyck de Vries' insane debut performance. After that, it was expected that the reigning champions of the sport would have a lot to say about the new kid on the block. And for the first time in F1 history, the opinion is completely undivided. Everyone thinks Nyck de Vries is the next big thing in Formula One. We know that Nyck already had a good relationship with the Mercedes team, seeing how he was signed to them in Formula E and had been waiting for his chance to step out of the role of a Mercedes reserve driver. So Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion and Formula One legend, had only good things to say about his team's reserve driver. In a post-race interview, Hamilton says he was incredibly happy for Nyck and actually really proud of him as well. He went on to say that the Dutch driver was just a good lad, and he was happy to have been a part of the same team as him. Hamilton also voiced everyone's thoughts when he said that finishing in the top 10 in your first race is mega. The Dutchman himself also stepped in, adding some kind words for his great friend, Max Verstappen, acknowledged that it was already difficult for Nyck to come in at the last minute, but he still delivered to the fullest at Monza. He finished off by saying his performance was impressive and that he was happy to see his friend get his well-deserved points. Next up, that praise was well-deserved. Everyone knows that one of the most iconic races on the F1 calendar is Monza, one of the 2 Italian Grand Prix. After all, they don't call it the Temple of Speed for nothing. It was part of the triple header including Spa and Zandvoort after the summer break, and it was highly anticipated by fans. But then disaster struck over at Williams. While some people may be thinking, what's new about that? It was actually a serious health issue with one of the drivers. The British driver Alex Albon had talked about not feeling well ahead of Monza, and soon enough, it was confirmed that he'd have to get surgery for appendicitis over the race weekend. So who would take over his role? There was a seat empty, and someone had to come and drive for the team. Enter Nyck de Vries, the Dutch reserve driver. He'd already had an impressive career in F1, having driven tests and practices for Williams, Mercedes, and Aston Martin. The man came in with a strong resume, and he proved it was all true when race day rolled around. On his F1 debut, de Vries finished in the points at P9 and actually brought his driver's standing up to 20, pushing actual Williams driver Nicholas Latifi to 21. The racing world had found its new star, and suddenly every team was waiting to snatch him up for 2022. But first, the other drivers on the grid had plenty to say about him and his debut as well. Now for the real question, are we going to see Nyck in 2023? It's worth mentioning that just a few months before Monza, it looked like there was no chance for de Vries to end up in one of those 20 coveted grid spots. After he got to drive a practice session for Mercedes in France, team boss Toto Wolff didn't seem very hopeful that they'd be able to take him on. But after that stellar performance, everything seems to have changed. To finish in the points during your first race in a car that hasn't been doing too well during the season is a big deal. And now he's the best option for every leftover seat on the grid. At the moment, these seats happen to be at Alpine, AlphaTauri, and Williams, but there's still no telling what he'll choose. As the driver himself said, Monza was a pretty crazy weekend for him, and everyone had to get used to the idea of him joining the grid. Williams is a great option, even though it's the least competitive of them all. Alex Albon's seat is confirmed for 2023, but the news just broke that Nicholas Latifi is leaving the team at the end of this year, leaving a path open for Nyck. For now, it remains to be seen whether they'll give the Dutch driver more chances this year. Next, Alpine has been having some contract drama of its own this year, meaning they now have a seat open for Esteban Ocon's teammate. Oscar Piastri may have left them in the dust, but they're one of the strongest midfield competitors and could be Nyck's strongest choice for next year. Finally, after Colton Herta of IndyCar didn't get his super license to race with AlphaTauri, the 27-year-old might be stepping in there. Lastly, this is definitely Nyck de Vries' year. De Vries is one of the luckiest men on the grid right now. After all, he got to debut in the points at a circuit like Monza, and he's being chased around by some of the biggest teams in in the world right now. So the real question is, wherever he ends up next year, are we going to see him in any more races this year? With the Russian Grand Prix cancelled, it leaves us with Singapore and its high-speed street circuit. And it looks like the driver is going to get another chance there too. While Alex is the first choice to be driving at the Grand Prix, there are still concerns about whether the high G-forces that drivers have to deal with at Marina Bay might reopen his wound. It'd definitely be one of the messier races. On top of all that, there were complications during the surgery as well, which led to respiratory failure for the driver and landed him in intensive care for a bit. Out of concern for their driver, Williams has decided to keep de Vries on standby, just in case something goes wrong at the last minute. The main plan is still for Albon to race, but with the bumpy Singapore circuit and the heat and humidity, there's plenty to be worried about. Let's just say that for the moment, there's at least a 50% chance that Nyck will end up racing at Marina Bay. Not long before we see him in an F1 seat of his own next year. Now for more news from the world of racing. First, the FIA is making this big change next year. There's been plenty of talk about all the rules and regulations being changed in Formula One right now, from engine rules to the race calendar. Now the FIA has announced an event they're adding in the next season, or at least just making more of. It has now officially been confirmed that the number of shorter sprint events will be doubled next year, even though there was plenty of talk about the added events being too much workload for the staff. But after plenty of debate, it's been settled. F1 President Stefano Domenicali made the official announcement that 6 sprint events will be added, though it's not confirmed what races they'll be at. For anyone not in the know, a sprint event is like a typical race weekend, but with a shorter race on Saturday to determine the starting grid. The event was first introduced in 2021 and brought in a lot more viewership, so it makes sense that it's staying on for another year. Next, another seat just got filled up. As we get closer and closer to the end of the 2022 season, all the empty seats on the 2023 grid are slowly getting filled up, or in some cases, they're opening up as drivers are released from their contracts on time or early. But for anyone who was shopping to grab a coveted Alfa Romeo seat, they'll be sorely disappointed. Zhou Guanyu, the Chinese driver who just finished his rookie season, has signed on with the team for another year after some impressive numbers last year. Because of this, there are officially only 3 seats left on the whole grid, which are 1 each at Alpine, Haas, and Williams. Finally, who else can we expect on the grid next year? Now that Zhou's taken up his seat at Alfa Romeo and we officially only have 3 openings, it's time to think about who's taking them up so we can get an idea of what the grid will look like in 2023. At Alpine, the front-runner and top choice is Pierre Gasly, but because of his tight Red Bull contract, they've explored other options, including Jack Doohan, Nyck de Vries, and Antonio Giovinazzi. Over at AlphaTauri, Yuki Tsunoda has been confirmed, so there'll only be a free seat if Gasly does move to Alpine. In that case, the top choice for the Red Bull sister team is Nyck de Vries. And lastly, the top choice to fill the leftover Haas seat is Antonio Giovinazzi, with Nico Hülkenberg and Mick Schumacher also in the running. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Nyck will be on the grid next year? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.